All right, hello and welcome. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something that happens millions of times a second right behind your screen. We're talking about the secret journey your browser takes to turn a bunch of code into the websites you see and use every single day. Let's dive right in. You know that feeling, right? We've all been there, just staring at that blank white void, tapping your fingers, waiting and waiting for something, anything to show up. It's a universal modern-day frustration. But what is actually going on during that delay? Well, that delay, that little moment of agony, it's not random. It's actually a sign of a really complex step-by-step process happening in the background. And if any part of that process hits a snag, well, you're left waiting. So today, we're going to find out exactly what's happening back there. Now, this whole journey from a line of code to a fully rendered website, it has a name. And understanding this name is the key to making the web faster for all of us. It's called the critical rendering path. Yeah, I know, it sounds super technical, but stick with me, because it's actually a fascinating story of how things get built. So, what is the critical rendering path, or CRP for short? Put simply, it's the essential set of steps your browser has to take to show you a web page. It's the recipe for turning the languages of the web, HTML for the structure, CSS for the style, and JavaScript for the cool interactive stuff, into the actual pixels that light up your screen. The absolute best way to think about the CRP is to picture a factory assembly line. Seriously, the browser gets a shipment of raw materials, that's the code, and it sends them down this line where each station does one specific job, one after the other, until a finished product rolls out. And that finished product? A beautiful working web page. And this assembly line has 6 main stations. It all starts with building out the blueprints for the content and the style. Then it combines them, figures out exactly where everything goes, paints it all in, and finally puts all the pieces together on the screen. So let's take a quick walk down this line. Okay, so the first 2 steps actually happen at the same time, which is pretty efficient. The browser grabs the HTML and builds something called the DOM, the Document Object Model. Just think of this as the architectural blueprint. It says what all the parts of the page are and where they belong. At the same time, it's looking at the CSS and building the CSSOM, or CSS object model. This is like the interior design plan, all the colors, fonts, and styles. Next up, the render tree. This is where the browser starts putting it all together. It takes that content blueprint, the DOM, and merges it with the style blueprint, the CSSOM. It's that magic moment where the structure of the page finally meets the cool design choices. But here's the really clever part. The browser is smart. It doesn't waste time and energy on stuff you're not even going to see. So if a developer has an element styled with display none, basically making it invisible, the browser just leaves it out of the render tree entirely. It's a neat little trick to make sure it's only working on what actually matters. And now for the grand finale, the last 3 steps. First is layout. This is where the browser calculates the exact size and position of every single thing on the page. Then comes Paint, where it literally fills in the pixels, all the text, colors, images, you name it. And finally, Composite. The browser takes all these freshly painted layers and draws them to the screen in the right order. And poof, you have a web page. So now that we know how the assembly line works, let's get back to our original problem, that slow loading website. If the assembly line is slow, the website is slow. So the big secret to a faster web is just making this assembly line as fast and efficient as possible. But how do we actually do that? The first strategy is all about focus. It's kind of like when you get home with groceries. You put the ice cream in the freezer first, right? You don't worry about the canned goods yet. It's the same idea here. We tell the browser to load the really important visual stuff immediately and hold off on the less critical things like interactive scripts until after the user can actually see something on the page. Our second strategy is pretty straightforward. We shrink the raw materials. This means doing things like minifying code, which is just stripping out all the unnecessary characters like spaces and comments, and compressing the files to make them way smaller for their trip over the internet. Smaller files mean the browser gets everything it needs to start building much, much faster. And our last big strategy is to try and shorten the path itself. A huge way to do this is by inlining the most important style rules. It's like putting the cooking instructions right on the front of the box instead of making you look for a separate booklet. The browser gets the critical visual info right away, no waiting. That, plus a simpler page structure, can make a massive difference. So, look, we've gone pretty deep into the technical side of how a web page gets built, but why does any of this really matter? At the end of the day, it's about so much more than just saving ourselves a few seconds of impatience. The speed of this process has a huge impact on user experience, on business, and even on access to information itself. Get a load of this number, 53%. That's how many mobile users will just give up and leave a site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. 3 seconds. That's it. That's the tiny window between gaining a new customer and losing one forever. In today's world, optimizing the critical rendering path isn't just a nice to have, it's absolutely essential. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. Every single millisecond we can shave off this process gets us one step closer to a web that feels completely instantaneous. So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. If that friction, that annoying wait time was completely gone, what new experiences, what new connections, what incredible things could we build on a web that was truly instant?